Before we begin the horror show, tell me where you're from. Drop your city name in the comments, and if there's a creepy story tied to it, I'll make sure to feature it in a future video. Your city's frightful past could be the next to terrorize us all. Story number 1. Emma Carter had always dreamed of living in the heart of the city, far away from the confines of her sleepy suburban hometown. After years of living in the shadows of her parents' expectations, she had finally earned the freedom to carve out a life of her own. The towering buildings, the neon lights, the constant hum of the city, it all captivated her in ways she hadn't expected. Midtown was everything she had imagined and more. She had moved into her one-bedroom apartment 6 months ago, a modest space, but the view was breathtaking. Her window framed the heart of the city like a painting, the skyline stretching endlessly before her. It was a small victory to her. After years of feeling like an outsider, she now felt like she belonged. There was a certain magic about the city that made everything feel possible. But in the weeks that followed her move, Emma started to feel an unexpected sense of unease. The days were busy, but the nights were a different story. The bustling streets below her window were full of life, but they didn't make her feel less alone. She had made friends at work, had a few dates, but nothing seemed to stick. Even when surrounded by people, Emma felt like a stranger in her own skin. It didn't help that her apartment was older than she had anticipated, and there were quirks to it. The floors creaked, and the walls seemed to whisper at night, as if they held stories from previous tenants who had long since moved on. It was easy to ignore at first, just the sounds of an old building settling. But there were times when the sounds seemed deliberate. There were moments when it felt as though someone was standing in the hallway, listening. One evening, after a particularly grueling workday, Emma decided to unwind with a book and a glass of wine. It had become a familiar ritual, sitting by her window, watching the city below. The apartment was quiet, save for the occasional hum of traffic in the distance. The light from the streetlights outside cast long shadows across the room, but Emma found comfort in the stillness. She was used to being alone, used to finding solace in her solitude. She was halfway through a novel when she glanced up from her book. Her eyes automatically drifted to the window, as they often did, to survey the city below. It was a habit she had developed since moving in, a habit that allowed her to lose herself in the endless maze of buildings, cars, and pedestrians. But tonight, something caught her eye. A figure stood in the window of the building directly across the street. Emma's breath caught in her throat. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her, a trick of the light perhaps. But as she focused, she realized it was a person, a silhouette, standing completely still, framed by the dim glow of an unshaded lamp. It was hard to make out any details from the distance, but there was something chilling about the figure. It was as if it had been frozen in time, unmoving and watching. Emma stared at it for a few moments, unsure of what to make of it. Her heart thudded in her chest, and she felt the familiar weight of anxiety creeping into her mind. It could be anyone, she told herself. Someone just standing in their room, lost in thought. But why did it feel like the figure was watching her? Shaking off the feeling, Emma stood and closed the blinds, hoping the darkness would offer some comfort. She didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but something about that figure unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. Still, she dismissed it. It's just a person, she thought. It's the city. Everyone's a stranger here. However, despite her rational thoughts, she couldn't shake the sensation of being observed. As she sat back down to finish her book, her gaze wandered back to the window, even though she had promised herself she wouldn't look again. And there, standing in the same spot, was the figure, motionless and still. Emma froze. Her heart rate quickened. She blinked and rubbed her eyes, thinking she might be imagining things, but no. It was real. The figure hadn't moved. It was still there, staring out the window toward her. This time, Emma didn't feel the sense of curiosity that she might have felt in the past. There was only a growing sense of dread. She wasn't sure why, but her instinct told her that something wasn't right. She told herself it was nothing. A strange coincidence, perhaps, but she couldn't ignore the knot forming in her stomach. Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Emma pulled the blinds back open, just a little, and peered through the crack. The figure was still there, and now she swore she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Its head was tilted slightly, as if it were looking directly at her. The darkness obscured most of its features, but the outline of its face was unmistakable. A wave of coldness washed over her, and she quickly shut the blinds again, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind raced. It's just a coincidence, she tried to tell herself. Maybe it's just someone across the street who happens to be standing in their window. It's nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. Instead, it deepened, turning into an oppressive weight that pressed against her chest. It was late when Emma finally crawled into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the figure. In her mind's eye, it was always there, standing still, watching, waiting. The thought of it was too unsettling, too unnatural to ignore. The next morning, Emma tried to push the unease from her mind. The figure had been unsettling, but it was still nothing more than a strange occurrence in the vastness of the city. She went about her day, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. She went to work as usual, attended her meetings, and had lunch with her colleagues. It wasn't until the afternoon that she received a message from her best friend Lily. "Hey, Em, what's going on? How's everything at the apartment? We still on for dinner tonight?" Emma smiled at the message, grateful for the distraction. She quickly typed back, "Yeah, everything's fine. It's just been a weird night. I think I might be getting paranoid, though. I'll tell you all about it tonight when you come over." Later that evening, Lily arrived at Emma's apartment as planned. The two friends settled into the couch, chatting about everything and nothing. The wine flowed freely, and the tension in Emma's chest began to ease. Lily, as always, had the ability to make her feel at ease with her jokes and infectious laughter. After a while, Emma reluctantly brought up the strange figure she had seen in the window. Lily raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling me someone was standing in the window staring at you? Maybe it's just someone minding their own business, Em." "I thought so too," Emma said, still unsure whether to be worried or not. "But the way it was standing, unmoving, almost like it was waiting for something." Lily waved it off. "Don't let it get to you. The city messes with your head sometimes. You're not used to the noise, the lights. It's probably nothing. You're just seeing things." Emma smiled, but the unease never truly left. She kept her blinds closed that night, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she could almost hear the tapping of fingers against the glass. The figure was there, in the back of her mind, always watching. But when she woke the next morning, everything seemed normal. The figure was gone. Her blinds were still closed. There was no one standing across the street. She breathed a sigh of relief, hoping it had just been a figment of her imagination. However, just as she was about to step into the shower, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Lily. Something happened. I just found out. Something's wrong. I think I saw someone across the street. It looked like they were staring directly into your apartment. I didn't think it was anything, but I just wanted to let you know." Emma froze. The figure had moved from her mind to reality. The message from Lily sent a ripple of unease down Emma's spine. It looked like they were staring directly into your apartment. Lily's words echoed in Emma's mind. It was impossible. The whole idea seemed ludicrous. The city was full of people, countless people coming and going, a constant blur of movement. It had to be nothing more than coincidence. But Lily had never been one to overreact, and the fact that her best friend had noticed something made Emma's skin crawl. Had she really seen something? Or was it just paranoia settling in? In the back of her mind, she kept picturing the silhouette from the night before. The tall, slender figure standing perfectly still. She could still see it so clearly, etched in her memory, its head tilted ever so slightly, as if it was looking at her through the shadows. She couldn't shake the unsettling image. That afternoon, Emma decided to leave her apartment and clear her head. She wandered aimlessly around the city, trying to shake off the creeping paranoia. Midtown was bustling with energy, people shouting, cars honking, vendors selling their goods. Life moving at a frenetic pace. But Emma felt disconnected from it all. Everyone seemed so absorbed in their own worlds, but in the back of her mind, she kept hearing that whisper of a thought. What if they're watching? When she returned to her apartment later that evening, she was exhausted. The idea of dealing with the mystery of the figure was mentally draining. She needed a distraction. But when she opened the door to her apartment, she was hit with an overwhelming feeling of dread. The place felt different, as if something had shifted. She couldn't place it, but something was off. Her heart pounded in her chest. She turned on all the lights, trying to chase away the shadows that seemed to creep closer with every passing second. The thought that someone, something, had been standing outside her window again gnawed at her, but she couldn't bring herself to look. She didn't want to know. It was then that she noticed it, the faintest of sounds coming from the corner of the living room, a low, rhythmic scratching. It was soft at first, like the sound of nails dragging across the floor. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her heart skipped a beat, and she held her breath, straining to hear. It's nothing, she tried to convince herself. It's just the wind, the building settling, or the pipes. But the sound persisted. Slowly, she moved toward the sound, every step more tentative than the last. The light above her flickered, casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to warp and stretch as though they were alive. As she reached the corner, she saw it. A small, thin mark had been scratched into the wooden floor. At first, Emma thought it was just a scratch, maybe caused by furniture being moved or something being dragged across the floor. But the more she looked at it, the more it seemed deliberate. The scratches formed a shape, a symbol. Emma leaned closer, her breath shallow as she tried to make sense of it. The shape resembled a crude, jagged spiral. The edges of the lines were uneven, the marks deep and etched into the floor, as if they had been scratched there for a purpose. Emma felt her stomach churn. Her hands shook as she reached out to touch the mark. The sensation was unnerving. It felt as though the floor itself had been altered in a way that wasn't natural. A sudden crash from the other room startled her, and she whirled around, her heart racing. But the apartment was silent again, except for the low hum of the city outside. Then her phone buzzed, cutting through the silence. It was Lily again. Em, have you heard? Lucy's gone missing. She vanished without a trace. No one knows where she went, but they found something strange. Her apartment was completely untouched, but the kitchen had been rearranged, like someone had been in there and moved everything. Emma's blood ran cold. Lucy was one of their mutual friends. She had been with Emma just 2 days ago. It couldn't be. Emma tried to push away the gnawing feeling in her chest, but something deep inside her knew. There was a connection. The figure, the strange noises, the symbols in her apartment. It was all adding up. Suddenly, everything clicked. What if Lucy saw something? Emma quickly typed a response to Lily. Did anyone see anything? Was there any sign of a struggle? Lily's reply came swiftly. No, nothing. The police are investigating, but there's no trace of her anywhere. I don't know. It's like she disappeared into thin air, gone. Emma sat down hard on the couch, her mind racing. The apartment felt colder now, even with the heat running. The walls seemed to close in on her, and she could almost feel the eyes of the figure on the other side of her window. She tried to push the thought away, but deep down she knew she wasn't imagining it. She had felt it before, that feeling of being watched, and now Lucy was gone. Something dark was happening, something she couldn't yet understand. It didn't take long for Emma to realize that Lucy's disappearance wasn't an isolated event. Over the next few weeks, other friends began to vanish. Each time it was the same story. No signs of struggle, no indication of where they had gone. But strange things were happening. Emma couldn't help but feel connected to it all. It wasn't just random disappearances. It felt like something was drawing her in, pulling her into the web of terror that seemed to be growing stronger with every passing day. Then the first body was found. It was late one night when Emma received the call. She was sitting in her apartment, staring at the window again, trying to will the figure away. The phone's sharp ring shattered the silence, making her jump. Hello, she answered breathlessly. Emma, it's me, Lily, came the frantic voice on the other end. There's something you need to see. They found Sarah. Emma's heart dropped. What do you mean, found Sarah? I just come to the park. The police are here. It's bad, Em. Lily's voice cracked. Emma barely heard the rest of the conversation as she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her mind clouded with panic. When she arrived at the park, the flashing blue lights of the police cars cast an eerie glow over everything. The scene was quiet except for the murmurs of the officers and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. "Lily!" Emma called out, her voice trembling. Lily appeared from behind a police officer, her face pale and drawn. "Emma, you need to see this," she whispered, leading her to a spot near the old fountain. And there, lying on the ground in the center of the fountain, was Sarah. But it wasn't just her body that shocked Emma. It was the way it had been mutilated. The skin was torn open, and deep gashes marked her torso. The wounds were precise, too precise for any animal attack. Emma felt bile rise in her throat as she looked at the grotesque display. It was like a ritual, the way her body had been arranged. In the center of her chest, a symbol was carved. It was the same symbol that had appeared on Emma's floor, the spiral. Emma stumbled backward, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she was seeing. "What is this?" she whispered, but Lily didn't answer. She just stared, her face pale and horrified. This is happening, Em," Lily said, her voice shaky. "It's happening to all of us. It's not just the disappearances. It's something worse." As Emma looked down at Sarah's mutilated body, the realization hit her. The figure, the strange events, the symbols. It was all connected. And the stalker wasn't just a spectator. He, or it, was a part of something far darker. The nightmare had only just begun. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The image of Sarah's mutilated body, the way the symbol had been carved into her chest, played over and over in her mind, like an endless loop. The spiral, the same symbol that had appeared on her floor, the same one that had been etched into the body of her friend. It was no longer a coincidence. As the hours passed, Emma sat by her window, staring out into the night. The city was quiet, too quiet. The streets below, which had been full of noise just hours before, now seemed eerily still. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the buildings. And Emma couldn't help but feel that the figure from her window was out there, watching her. It was as if it had followed her into her very home. The thought made her stomach churn, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the darkened skyline. What was it? What did it want? And why had it chosen her? The more she thought about it, the more she felt like she was being drawn into something much bigger than herself. Lily had insisted that Emma visit the police the next day to give her statement and offer any information she might have that could help in the investigation. But Emma knew there was more to this than what the police could handle. This wasn't just some random string of disappearances. This was something intentional, something malevolent. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard a knock at the door. She froze. Who could it be at this hour? She hadn't been expecting anyone. Emma stood up slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. She cautiously moved toward the door, peeking through the peephole. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the hallway, staring back at her with wide, unblinking eyes, was the figure. She could barely make out its features, but the outline of the tall, slender shape was unmistakable. Its head was tilted slightly to the side, as though it was listening, waiting. Emma backed away from the door in a panic, her mind racing. Was it really here? Was it possible that it had followed her from the park, from the scene of Sarah's body? Her pulse quickened as she reached for her phone. She could barely hold it steady as she dialed Lily's number. "Lily, it's here," Emma whispered urgently when Lily answered. "It's outside my door. The stalker. He's here." "What?" Lily's voice cracked with disbelief. "Are you sure? Emma, you have to—" But Emma didn't hear the rest of the sentence. The phone slipped from her hand as the door handle began to turn. She backed away from the door, her breath shallow, her heart racing. What was it? What did it want from her? The door creaked open, just enough to let a thin sliver of moonlight seep through. But no one was there. Emma stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, her body trembling with fear. She waited, but the figure didn't appear again. The hallway remained empty, the silence stretching out like a dark, suffocating blanket. But as Emma cautiously approached the door to close it, she noticed something strange. A small scrap of paper had been slipped under the door. Trembling, she picked it up. The paper was yellowed, frayed at the edges, as though it had been there for years. On it was a single crude drawing. It was the spiral. But it wasn't just the spiral. There was something more, something disturbing about the drawing. It was as though the spiral was alive, twisting and writhing in a sickening motion on the page. The more Emma looked at it, the more she felt herself being pulled into it, as though it was drawing her in, consuming her thoughts. She shook her head and dropped the paper, her hands shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the fear that had been gnawing at her was now an undeniable, overwhelming truth. It was real. The stalker, the symbol, the bodies. It was all connected. And now she was part of it. The days that followed felt like a blur of terror. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched at every moment, whether she was at work or back in her apartment. She started to see the figure in the corners of her eyes, always just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. At night, the whispers began, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She knew she had to do something. The police were no help. They had no leads, no suspects, no explanations. The disappearances were piling up, and Emma was sure she was next. One evening, after another sleepless night, Emma found herself standing in front of an old crumbling building on the outskirts of Midtown. She didn't know how she had gotten here, or why, but she couldn't ignore the pull. It was as though something, someone, was guiding her here, urging her to uncover the truth. The building was an abandoned church. Overgrown ivy crawled up its walls, and the once pristine white exterior was now stained with age and neglect. It had been deserted for as long as Emma could remember, but now it felt like the right place to uncover the answers. She stepped inside, the door creaking behind her as she entered. The air inside was thick with dust, the faint smell of mold hanging in the stale atmosphere. The church had an old, forgotten feel to it, like time itself had abandoned the place. As Emma moved deeper into the church, she stumbled across something strange, an altar hidden in a corner beneath a tattered cloth. It was as though someone had been using it recently, despite the decay of the place. On the altar were old books, their pages yellowed and torn, and in the center of the altar, there was something that made Emma's blood run cold, a wooden carving of the spiral. Suddenly a voice echoed through the empty room. "Welcome, Emma." She froze. The voice was familiar, but twisted, distorted. It was coming from the shadows at the back of the church. Slowly a figure emerged. It was the stalker. But now Emma could see him clearly. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and dark. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he had all the time in the world. "You've come to understand," the figure said, his voice cold and almost mocking. "You've come to learn the truth." Emma stepped back, her legs unsteady. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice trembled with fear. "What do you want from me?" The figure stepped closer, and Emma could see a twisted smile curl on his lips. "I am the guardian of the spiral, the keeper of the curse that has haunted your bloodline for generations. You didn't think you could escape it, did you?" Emma's breath caught in her throat. "What bloodline? What curse?" The figure raised a hand, pointing toward the altar. "Your past, Emma. Your family's dark history. The spiral is a symbol of your inheritance, and now it's time for you to pay the price." Emma stared at the figure in shock. The stalker wasn't just some random man. It was something far darker, something tied to her family's past. The terror, the mutilations, the disappearances, all of it had been leading her here. And now it was her turn. Emma's head spun as she struggled to comprehend the revelation before her. The figure before her, no longer just a shadow in the corner of her eye, spoke with an unnerving calmness, as if the terrifying truths he spoke of were nothing more than casual conversation. He wasn't just the stalker she had feared for weeks. He was something far more sinister, something deeply embedded in the history of her family. Her thoughts raced. Her mind fought to find an explanation, to rationalize what was happening. But there was no rational explanation for this. No escaping the nightmare that had been chasing her all her life. "What do you mean, my family's bloodline? What curse are you talking about?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of confusion and terror. The figure's lips curled into a grotesque smile. Your bloodline was marked long ago, Emma. An ancient pact was made, one that bound you to the spiral. The symbol, the mutilations. It's all part of the curse that has followed your ancestors for centuries. And now it's your turn to take part in the ritual. The spiral claims what it is owed. Emma recoiled, stepping backward. She wanted to run, to escape, but her legs were frozen to the spot. The words the figure spoke were like poison, slowly infiltrating her mind. Her heart pounded violently in her chest as she fought to make sense of it all. I... I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't have anything to do with this. The figure tilted his head, a look of cruel amusement crossing his face. You don't remember, do you? Your ancestors made a deal with the forces that govern the spiral. They traded their souls for power, for protection, for immortality. But such bargains always come at a price. Your family has been paying that price for generations, and now it's your turn to fulfill the debt. Emma's breath quickened. Her thoughts were a blur as the weight of his words began to settle on her shoulders. Her mind flashed back to her childhood. Strange nightmares, odd coincidences, and a deep sense of dread that had always lingered in the background of her life. She had always known something was wrong, but she had never imagined it would lead to this. Why me? Why now? She demanded, her voice rising in panic. I didn't make any deal. I didn't ask for any of this. The figure stepped closer, his hollow eyes locking onto hers. It's not about what you asked for, Emma. It's about what was promised. And now it's your fate. The spiral is calling you. The others, Sarah, Lily, have all been sacrificed in preparation for your awakening. Emma staggered back, her knees weak, her entire world collapsing around her. No, no, you're lying. You're lying. The figure raised a hand, his fingers curling into a tight fist as if controlling the very air around her. Your denial is futile. It was always going to come to this. You were never going to escape it, Emma. The spiral is not just a symbol. It's a living, breathing entity, and it feeds on the souls of those who are marked by it. Emma's mind spun. She thought back to the strange occurrences in her life, the inexplicable sensations of being watched, the unsettling drawings of the spiral that had appeared over the years, the nightmares that had plagued her since childhood. She had always chalked it up to anxiety, to stress, to a strange twist of fate. But now it all made sense. It wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. It had all been leading to this moment. A sense of dread washed over her, and her legs gave out. She collapsed to the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably as she tried to process the horror that had unfolded before her. She had no idea how to fight this. How could she? The stalker, this creature that had been tormenting her, was tied to her very bloodline, to something far older than her understanding of the world. And then, as if reading her mind, the figure spoke once more, his voice like a cold whisper. You don't have to fight me, Emma. You just have to accept your fate. The spiral claims you, just as it has claimed those before you. Emma's heart sank. Was it true? Was there no way to stop this? She glanced back at the altar where the carving of the spiral lay, its twisting shape seeming to shift and writhe before her eyes. Her thoughts raced, and for a moment, everything went quiet. No sound, no movement, just a suffocating silence that pressed down on her. She felt as though the very walls of the abandoned church were closing in on her. There had to be a way out of this, didn't there? A way to break the curse, a way to stop the spiral from consuming her. Without thinking, Emma scrambled to her feet and bolted toward the altar. She grabbed the carving, her hands trembling as she lifted it from the stone slab. The figure didn't move, but Emma could feel his gaze piercing through her. It was as though he was waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting for her to give in. As her fingers brushed against the carving, she felt a surge of energy, dark, malevolent energy, that pulsed through her body. The spiral seemed to come alive in her hands, its shape shifting as though it were breathing. Emma gasped, the sensation overwhelming her senses. She felt as though she were falling, as if the ground beneath her was giving way. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything stopped. The figure stood still, his face expressionless. The altar was empty. The spiral no longer pulsed with energy. And then she understood. This wasn't just about breaking the curse. It was about embracing it. The spiral wasn't something to fight against. It was a force of nature, an ancient power that had been a part of her bloodline since the beginning of time. To survive, she would have to give herself to it, just as her ancestors had. The thought made her stomach turn, but there was no other choice. The figure smiled, his expression one of twisted satisfaction. You understand now, Emma. It's time to fulfill your role. With a resigned sigh, Emma placed the carving back on the altar. Her heart pounded as she took a step back, surrendering herself to the inevitable. The spiral was her fate. There was no escaping it. She had been marked long before she had ever known it, and now there was no turning back. Emma stood before the altar, her body trembling as the realization settled deep within her bones. The spiral, now an almost tangible presence in the room, pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The shadows that clung to the corners of the church seemed to shift and writhe, as if alive, watching her every move. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the weight of what she had learned pressing down on her like an invisible hand. The figure, the silent stalker, remained silent, his hollow eyes never leaving hers. He stood still, his form like a ghostly silhouette against the dim light of the church, waiting for her to make her final decision. Emma knew what was expected of her. She could feel it in the air, thick with the power of the curse that bound her. You must choose, Emma, the figure finally spoke, his voice low, like the whisper of a long-forgotten secret. The spiral can consume you, or you can become one with it. The choice has always been yours, even if you didn't know it. Her heart raced as she took a step back, her eyes darting between the altar and the figure. Her mind swirled with conflicting thoughts, fear mixing with a strange sense of understanding. For years, she had fought against the shadows that had haunted her, had tried to rationalize the eerie sensations, the disappearances of her friends. But now it all made sense. The spiral, the curse, it had been guiding her all along, shaping her every step without her even realizing it. Emma glanced at the altar again, at the spiral, and her mind flashed to the mutilated bodies of her friends. Sarah, Lily. They had been victims, but she was different. The figure had said it herself. She was marked, chosen, and now it was her turn to decide what that meant. What will happen to me if I refuse? Emma asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. The figure's smile deepened, but it was not one of amusement. It was a smile that conveyed something darker, something far more terrifying. If you refuse, the spiral will claim you anyway, but it will be far worse than anything you can imagine. Your soul will be trapped in the spiral for eternity, and you will be forced to watch as the curse feeds on those around you, those you love, those you care for. There will be no escape, no mercy. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The thought of losing everything, of watching her loved ones suffer in ways that she could never undo, was too much to bear. But what was the alternative? What did it mean to become one with the spiral? What would she have to sacrifice? The figure tilted his head, sensing her indecision. There is no room for hesitation. You have already been marked. The spiral has chosen you. All you have to do is accept it. Embrace it. You will gain power beyond your wildest dreams, immortality, and freedom from the torment that has plagued your family for generations. Emma closed her eyes, the weight of the decision crushing her. Her mind swirled with images of Sarah and Lily, their bodies mutilated in ways she couldn't even bear to comprehend. She had failed to protect them. She had failed to understand the truth in time to save them. But could she truly become part of the curse? Could she accept a fate that had already claimed so many before her? A low, rumbling sound echoed through the church. It was almost like the earth itself was groaning in anticipation. The spiral seemed to shimmer, its twisting form beckoning her, calling her closer. She felt the pull deep within her, a force stronger than any fear she had ever known. It wasn't just a symbol, it was alive. It wanted her. Emma began, her voice trembling as she tried to steady her breath. I can't. But before she could finish, the figure stepped forward, closing the distance between them in an instant. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. He placed a cold, ghostly hand on her shoulder, and she felt the power surge through her, filling her with dread. "You don't have to speak," the figure said softly. "The spiral has already chosen you. There is no going back." A scream of frustration built in Emma's chest. She had never wanted this. She had never asked for this curse to be her burden, but the weight of generations, the bloodline that had bound her to this fate, was too heavy to deny. She felt her body trembling, her soul aching as the spiral's influence began to overtake her thoughts. It was too strong to fight. For a moment, Emma thought of everything she would lose: the life she had known, the people she loved, the possibility of freedom. But in the next instant, it all became irrelevant. The spiral was more than just a curse. It was her destiny. With a deep breath, Emma stepped forward toward the altar. The moment her fingers touched the spiral, a surge of power exploded within her. She felt the curse wrap around her like chains, binding her to the ancient force that had controlled her family for centuries. Her vision blurred, and the world around her seemed to fracture, splintering into 1,000 pieces. When the darkness finally faded, Emma found herself standing in the center of the church. But everything had changed. The altar was no longer just a symbol. It was the heart of the spiral, a pulsing, living entity. And she was its vessel. The figure stood before her, his form now completely consumed by the darkness. He bowed low, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You have made the right choice, Emma. You are now part of the spiral. You will never know fear again." Emma's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, her mind clear and sharp. She could feel the power surging through her, coursing like blood in her veins. The terror, the confusion, the pain. It was all gone. The spiral had taken her, but it had also given her strength beyond anything she could have ever imagined. She looked up at the figure, and for the first time, a smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "I am no longer afraid." The figure's smile faltered. He had expected fear, hesitation. But Emma was not the same woman who had walked into the church just hours before. She had embraced the curse, had become one with the spiral. And as the figure faded into the shadows, Emma stepped forward, her footsteps echoing through the empty church. The spiral was hers now, and nothing, not even the figure who had guided her, could take it from her. Her journey had just begun. The spiral had claimed her, and now she would make it her own. Story number 2. The town of Hollow Creek had always been a quiet place. Nestled between dense forests and winding rivers, it was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and rumors spread faster than the seasonal rains. The air smelled of earth, wood, and the occasional burning leaf. A town where nothing truly sinister was expected to happen. Or at least that's what they thought. Daniel Morrow had been the town's gravedigger for over 15 years, and his life had always been one of solitude. He'd inherited the position from his father, who had inherited it from his own father before him. The Morrow family had long been the custodians of the town cemetery, and for generations they had dug graves and maintained the grounds. There was nothing remarkable about the work, nothing that ever seemed unusual or out of the ordinary. It was a job that required patience, hard labor, and a steady hand. But tonight would change everything. Daniel had spent the day digging a new grave for an elderly man who had passed away the week before. The ground was soft, and the shovel had sunk into it with ease. The work was slow, methodical, as it always was. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned an inky shade of blue, Daniel felt an uneasy sense of foreboding settle over him. He tried to shake the feeling off, telling himself it was just the solitude of the cemetery getting to him. After all, it wasn't unusual for the air to grow heavy when the night settled in. It was just after midnight when the police arrived. Daniel was sitting on a bench near the newly dug grave, wiping the sweat from his brow, when the headlights of a police car cut through the darkness. The car's siren was off, but the light still flickered across the gravestones, casting long shadows on the ground. 2 officers stepped out of the car, their faces grim, their expressions tense. They didn't look like they were here for a routine checkup. "Mr. Morrow," one of the officers called, his voice heavy with authority, We need you to come with us. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. What's happened? The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned, glancing over his shoulder toward the far corner of the cemetery. Daniel followed his gaze, and his stomach dropped. There, near the old mausoleum, a small crowd of people had gathered. Some were standing by the police cars, while others were pointing toward the body that lay in the dirt. As the officer led him to the scene, Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't understand why the police would be here. He had heard nothing unusual. No screams, no sounds of struggle. The cemetery had been quiet, just as it always was at night. But when he arrived at the scene, the reality of what had happened hit him like a punch to the gut. The woman was young, barely in her 20s. Her body lay contorted, her face twisted in an expression of terror. She had been stabbed multiple times and her clothes were torn as if she had fought back. But it wasn't just the wounds that horrified Daniel. It was the symbols. Deep, intricate symbols were carved into the woman's chest, the flesh torn open to reveal them in grotesque detail. They looked familiar, too familiar. The patterns were almost identical to those Daniel had etched into the tombstones for years. He knew the marks well. They were the same ones that appeared on every grave in the cemetery, the ones that had been passed down through his family for generations. The officer stood beside him, his face pale. "You've seen these symbols before, haven't you, Mr. Morrow?" Daniel nodded slowly, though he couldn't tear his eyes away from the mutilated body. "I've carved them into the graves. They're the same." "Do you know what they mean?" The officer's voice was tight, but there was an edge of desperation in his words. He wasn't just asking for information. He was searching for answers. Daniel shook his head, trying to steady his nerves. "No, I don't." The officer turned to the other, his expression darkening. "Get forensics here. We need to figure out what's going on." As the officers moved away, Daniel stood there, frozen in place. His mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. The cemetery was his life. The graves were his responsibility. He had never once thought that the symbols he carved into the stone would be tied to something like this. But as the night grew colder and the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Daniel realized the truth. This was just the beginning. The next few days in Hollow Creek were a blur for Daniel. The police had taken him in for questioning more than once, but every time they had come back with the same questions. Questions about the symbols, about the cemetery, and most of all, about him. The people of the town who had once treated him like a ghost now looked at him with suspicion, as if he was the one who had committed the crime. The officers had no answers. They couldn't make sense of the mutilated bodies, nor could they explain the strange symbols that seemed to mark each victim. And as more bodies appeared, each one more grotesque than the last, Daniel found himself slipping further into a spiral of fear and confusion. Every night the town seemed to grow darker. The people's whispers became louder, their suspicion more palpable. Some said that the cemetery was cursed, that it had always been a place of dark rituals. Others believed the murders were a message, a warning. And then there were those who thought that the gravedigger himself, Daniel Morrow, had something to do with it all. Daniel spent his nights wandering the cemetery, his hands trembling as he traced the familiar marks on the graves. He didn't know why he had been dragged into this, why his family's symbols had been used to mark the bodies. But the more he thought about it, the more he began to suspect that the answers were buried somewhere in the history of the town, a history that he had never been told. One evening, as he sat in his small cottage on the edge of the cemetery, a thought struck him. He had always known that his family's role as the gravedigger had been tied to something ancient, something that stretched far back into the town's history. But he had never questioned it. It was simply a tradition, something that had been passed down from father to son. But now, with the murders mounting and the police closing in on him, he realized that he could no longer ignore the truth. He needed to understand what was happening, even if it meant digging into the darkest corners of Hollow Creek's past. The next morning, Daniel made his way to the town archives, a small, dusty building that had stood at the center of Hollow Creek for as long as anyone could remember. Inside, he searched through old records, hoping to find something, anything that would explain the murders, the symbols, and his family's connection to it all. It was in the deepest, most forgotten corners of the archive that he found it. An old journal, brittle with age, hidden beneath piles of forgotten documents. The journal belonged to his great-grandfather, the last of the Morrow family to serve as the town's gravedigger. As Daniel flipped through the pages, he uncovered the chilling truth. The Morrow family had always been the caretakers of the cemetery, but their role was not as innocent as it seemed. They had made a pact with an ancient cult that had once inhabited the town. In exchange for their service in maintaining the cemetery, the cult had promised the Morrow family protection and prosperity. But the pact had a price. Every generation of the Morrow family was expected to offer a sacrifice. Daniel's great-grandfather had been the last to honor the pact, offering up one of his own family members to the cult. And now it seemed the ritual had begun again. Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the weight of the truth settled over him. The murders were not random. They were sacrifices, part of a twisted ritual that had been passed down through the ages. But there was more. The journal also contained references to symbols that had been carved into the bodies of the victims. They were the same symbols Daniel had been carving into the graves for years. As the pieces began to fall into place, Daniel realized that he was not just the gravedigger. He was a part of something much darker, something that had been controlling Hollow Creek for centuries. The weight of the truth hit Daniel like a physical blow, one that left him gasping for air. The pact, the ancient cult, the sacrifices, all of it was more horrifying than he could have imagined. But as he sat alone in the musty town archives, his thoughts spiraling into a dark abyss, one thought dominated his mind. How had he become involved in something so sinister without even realizing it? The journal in his hands trembled. His great-grandfather's writing was shaky, some passages nearly illegible. But the message was clear. The Morrow family had been bound by blood to the cemetery, caretakers of its graves and keepers of its dark secrets. The symbols carved into the tombstones were not mere decoration. They were wards, designed to trap the spirits of the dead and bind them to the earth. The cult had taught his ancestors these symbols, and they were part of the rituals that had kept the cult's power alive for centuries. As the last of the Morrow family gravediggers, Daniel was now the one expected to continue the twisted tradition. His father had done his part, though Daniel had always assumed it was just part of the family's normal, if odd, responsibilities. But the murders, the mutilated bodies, the symbols carved into them, these were the result of a pact that had gone horribly wrong. Daniel slammed the journal shut, his mind racing as he processed what he had learned. The sacrifices had started again, and now the victims were not merely part of a ritual, but were being targeted by the cult in a desperate attempt to regain their former power. The symbols were the key, and if he didn't act fast, the cycle would continue forever. Desperate for answers, Daniel sought out the town's oldest resident, an elderly woman named Mrs. Agnes Miller. She had lived in Hollow Creek her entire life and was known for her vast knowledge of the town's history. If anyone knew about the cult, it would be her. With the journal tucked into his coat, Daniel knocked on the door of her small cottage, located on the outskirts of town, where the fog never seemed to lift. Mrs. Miller opened the door, her gnarled hands gripping the frame as she peered up at Daniel with narrowed eyes. Her face was lined with age, but her sharp gaze suggested a mind that was still as clear as ever. "What is it, Daniel?" she asked, her voice rasping like dry leaves. "What brings you to my doorstep at this hour?" "I need your help," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've learned something about the town, about my family. I need to know what happened, what the symbols mean, the murders, the cult. I found something in the archives, and I don't know what to do with it." Mrs. Miller's expression hardened at the mention of the cult. She stepped aside, allowing him entry. "Come in," she said, her voice low. "I've been waiting for you to find out the truth. The time has come." Inside her dimly lit cottage, the air smelled of herbs and dust. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Mrs. Miller motioned for Daniel to sit at the small wooden table, where she had once taught him about the town's lore when he was a child. On the walls, old maps and faded photographs of Hollow Creek adorned the space, but it was the ancient symbols etched on the walls that caught Daniel's eye. They were the same as the ones in his great-grandfather's journal. the same symbols he had seen carved into the bodies of the victims. "These symbols," Daniel began, voice trembling, "what do they mean? Why are they on the graves, on the bodies? My family, as we've always carved them, but I never understood their purpose." Mrs. Miller sighed heavily, her gnarled hands folding in her lap. "The symbols are ancient," she explained slowly, her voice heavy with the weight of centuries. "They were passed down by the cult that once ruled this town. They are not just markings. They are keys, keys to another world. A world beyond our own, where spirits and dark forces reside. The cult used these symbols to summon and control those forces, and your family, well, you were bound to them." Daniel stared at her, confusion and dread mixing within him. "Bound to them? What do you mean? My family wasn't part of the cult. They were gravediggers, caretakers." "The gravediggers' bloodline," Mrs. Miller said, her voice barely above a whisper, "was chosen long ago to maintain the cemetery. You see, the cemetery wasn't just a place of rest for the dead. It was a gateway to another realm, a realm the cult could control. And your family's role was to keep the gateway open, to ensure that the spirits of the cult's ancestors could return when the time was right." Daniel's mind reeled as he tried to process her words. The murders, the bodies, they're sacrifices, aren't they? To bring the cult back? Mrs. Miller nodded. "Yes, the cult's power grew weak over time, but they believed that if they could return to Hollow Creek, they could regain their strength. They used the graves as vessels, and every few generations, they required a blood sacrifice to unlock the gateway. The symbols you carve are part of that process. But now, the cult is desperate. The murders are a sign that they're coming back. They're using the symbols to call forth their power, and they need more sacrifices to complete the ritual." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. "So, what do I do? How do I stop this?" Mrs. Miller's eyes darkened. "The only way to stop the cult is to close the gateway, to destroy the symbols and sever the link between the cult and the town. But there's a catch. The ritual cannot be undone by one person alone. You'll need help. The spirits of those who died in the cult's name, they must be freed. Only then will the town be free." Daniel looked down at the journal in his hands, his great-grandfather's words echoing in his mind. "There must be another way. I can't just sit here and wait for the cult to complete their ritual." "You're not alone in this," Mrs. Miller reassured him. "The town has always had its secrets. If you want to stop them, you must first learn how to unlock the truth buried deep within Hollow Creek. Seek out the ones who have hidden the most. They know what must be done." The next few days were a blur of frenetic activity for Daniel. He felt as though he were walking through a waking nightmare, the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on him from all sides. As the deaths continued to mount and the symbols began to appear on more and more bodies, Daniel felt his grip on reality slipping, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Determined to uncover the final piece of the puzzle, he spent sleepless nights poring over the journal, retracing his great-grandfather's steps. There was something he was missing, something that would tie everything together. It wasn't until one night, deep in the bowels of the cemetery, that he stumbled upon the answer. While inspecting an old crypt, Daniel noticed something odd. The floor beneath one of the gravestones had sunken slightly, as though something beneath the earth had shifted. His heart raced as he knelt down, his hands trembling as he pried at the stone with a nearby shovel. The ground beneath gave way with a low creak, revealing a hidden chamber below. A small, narrow staircase led down into the darkness, and as Daniel descended, he felt a cold wind rush past him, a wind that carried with it the faintest whisper of a voice. When he reached the bottom, he found himself in a cavernous room, its walls lined with bones and twisted symbols. But it was the center of the room that caught his attention. There, in the center of a dark, blood-stained circle, lay an ancient altar. The symbols from the journal, the ones that had haunted him, were etched into the altar in intricate detail. And as he stood there, staring down at the altar, Daniel realized the truth. The gateway was not just a metaphor. It was real. The cult had created it. And now it was ready to open once more. The air in the hidden chamber felt thick with tension, as though something ancient and restless stirred beneath the earth. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps as he stepped forward, the unease in his chest growing with every step. The symbols on the altar seemed to pulse, faintly glowing in the dim light, and for a moment he almost believed he could hear whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs, emanating from the darkness around him. He couldn't tell whether it was the overwhelming fear or the realization of the grim truth that had him on edge. The cult had succeeded in creating a gateway, a portal that bridged the living world and whatever malevolent force lay beyond. All the bloodshed, all the symbols, the murders, they were all part of a single, unbroken chain that would now culminate in something far worse than any of them could have imagined. Daniel's eyes fell on the altar. At the center of the grotesque carvings was a stone bowl, its rim covered in dried blood. Around it were the same marks he had seen on the victims, precise, ritualistic. A gnawing dread curled in his gut as he realized that each murder had been a piece of a larger puzzle, a key to unlock the power that had been buried beneath Hollow Creek for centuries. The town had been built on this cursed ground, and now the time had come for the cult to claim it. A sudden noise broke through his thoughts, a rustling sound, followed by the sharp crack of a twig snapping. Daniel spun around, instinctively drawing his flashlight from his belt. He swept the beam across the chamber, searching for the source of the noise, but found nothing. The room was empty, its dark corners still and silent. Yet the sense of being watched lingered, heavy and unnerving. Then, as if in response to his unease, the whispers grew louder. The symbols on the altar seemed to writhe in the low light, twisting into forms that defied logic. And suddenly Daniel knew. The cult wasn't just bound to the graveyard or the altar. Their presence, their power, lingered in the very earth beneath him. A loud guttural roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the ground beneath his feet. The walls trembled, and the air seemed to grow colder, as if the very atmosphere was being sucked into the void. Something had been awakened, something that had slept for centuries. Daniel backed away from the altar, his heart hammering in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to hide, not from the cult, not from the curse that was now upon them all. He turned to flee up the narrow staircase, but before he could take a step, a figure emerged from the shadows, blocking his exit. It was Mrs. Miller. Her face, once gentle and wise, was now twisted with a malevolent energy that sent a chill straight through Daniel's spine. Her eyes glowed faintly, an unnatural light that reflected the same darkness that had seeped into the earth itself. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice distant, almost detached. "Now there's no going back." "What's happening?" Daniel demanded, trying to control the panic rising in his chest. "What have you done? You said you wanted to help." Her lips curled into a twisted smile, her features stretching unnaturally. "I never wanted to help. I wanted to see it through to the end. Hollow Creek's fate was sealed long before you were born. Your bloodline is bound to the cult's legacy, Daniel. There's no escaping it now." Daniel's heart dropped as the realization hit him. Mrs. Miller had known all along. She had played him, used him as a pawn in the cult's game, just as his great-grandfather had been used before him. His family had been cursed from the very beginning, destined to serve the dark forces that had once ruled Hollow Creek. He took a step back, his mind racing. Why me? Why my family? Mrs. Miller's eyes gleamed with sadistic glee. Your family has always been the caretakers, the keepers of the gateway. We needed your blood to open it once more. You've served your purpose. The ritual will be complete, and the cult will rise again. The ground beneath them seemed to rumble as the air thickened with a malevolent energy. Daniel looked desperately toward the altar, his mind spinning. There had to be a way to stop this, to close the gateway before it was too late. But as the seconds ticked by, he knew that time was running out. A shadow darted across the chamber, moving so quickly it was almost impossible to track. Daniel's flashlight flickered as he swung it around, but the shadow seemed to grow deeper, more intense. He could hear something, something ancient and powerful, stirring in the depths of the earth. Mrs. Miller's laughter echoed in the darkness. the sound twisting and contorting as if it were coming from all directions at once. "You can't stop it," she said, her voice now a low, mocking hiss. "It's already begun." In that moment, Daniel knew there was only one option left: the journal. His great-grandfather's journal had mentioned something, a ritual to close the gateway. Something about blood, symbols, and a final sacrifice. He had dismissed it at first, assuming it was merely a cautionary tale, a way to frighten the gravediggers into obedience. But now he realized the truth. The cult had been manipulating his family for generations, using them as tools to maintain the gateway. And now it was up to him to stop it. With shaking hands, Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the journal. He scanned the pages frantically, looking for the key to ending the madness. And then, there it was, a single, chilling line. To close the gateway, the last of the gravediggers must offer their blood in sacrifice, binding the spirits to the earth and severing the cult's hold forever. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he understood. He had to end it, once and for all. He turned to face Mrs. Miller, who was now advancing toward him, her eyes glowing with unnatural light. "It's over," he said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "I won't let you destroy this town." She stopped, a flicker of surprise passing over her features. "You can't stop it, Daniel," she hissed, her form seeming to waver and shift. "You are one of us." But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He stepped forward, raising the journal high above his head. The air seemed to hum with energy, the symbols on the altar glowing brighter, pulsing with an insidious rhythm. With one final desperate shout, Daniel plunged the journal into the heart of the altar, feeling the stone crack beneath his hands. For a moment, everything went still. And then, the ground shook with a deafening roar. The symbols on the altar burst into flames, and the shadows that had haunted the town for so long seemed to writhe and scream, twisting violently as though trying to escape from the earth itself. The energy in the room grew unbearable, and Daniel felt a surge of power course through him, hot, searing, and terrifying. But he held his ground. He had to finish this. With a final cry, Daniel pressed his bloodied hand to the altar, completing the ritual his great-grandfather had started, and with it, closing the gateway forever. As the flames died down and the echoes of the cult's fury faded into the night, Daniel collapsed to the ground, exhausted but alive. The ritual was over. The cult was gone. But the town of Hollow Creek would never be the same again. The air was still. A heavy silence settled over Hollow Creek, as if the town itself had taken a collective breath after centuries of suffocating in the darkness of the cult's influence. Daniel lay on the cold stone floor of the chamber, his body aching, his mind reeling with the consequences of what he had just done. The weight of the blood sacrifice, the ritual, the sheer intensity of the force he had just confronted. It all seemed like a terrible, lingering nightmare that refused to release its grip on him. His hands trembled as he pushed himself up, his vision blurred by exhaustion. The altar had cooled, the eerie glow from the symbols now extinguished. The oppressive atmosphere, the whispers, the heavy sense of dread. Everything had vanished. But even as the room grew still, Daniel could not shake the feeling that he wasn't entirely alone. He wiped his brow with a trembling hand, glancing around the chamber. The stone walls, once covered in the dark marks of the cult's rituals, now appeared almost peaceful, as though the evil they had once harbored had been purged from them. The bones of the forgotten cultists, the scattered relics, and the remnants of their long-forgotten rites had been reduced to nothing, consumed by the ritual Daniel had performed. But deep down, Daniel knew this wasn't the end. He had severed the cult's hold on the town, closed the gateway to the darkness beneath the earth. Yet in the back of his mind, a cold, nagging thought lingered. Was it really over? With a final glance toward the now dominant silence that hung over the graveyard, Daniel stumbled toward the narrow stone staircase leading back to the surface. The town of Hollow Creek awaited him, but it was no longer the same place he had left. The echoes of the cult's reign, the blood that had been spilled over generations, the twisted power that had shaped this land. It was all still there, lingering like a stain that would never completely fade. The door to the hidden chamber creaked open, and Daniel stepped into the moonlit graveyard. The night air felt strangely lighter, as though the weight of centuries of darkness had been lifted from his shoulders. The town seemed to be at peace, its streets quiet, undisturbed. There were no signs of the monstrous figures that had once roamed the streets, no whispers of cultists lurking in the shadows. But as Daniel walked through the cemetery toward the old gravedigger's shack, he felt the presence of something, close behind him. The hairs on his neck stood on end, and a chill ran down his spine. He turned, expecting to see Mrs. Miller, or perhaps one of the other cult members he had encountered in the depths of the chamber. But no one was there. Still, the sensation of being watched remained. Reaching the shack, Daniel paused, his eyes drawn to the worn, creaking structure. His mind flashed back to his great-grandfather's journal, the cryptic notes he had read, and the symbols that had marked the graves of the victims. There was something about the journal, about the family legacy, that still gnawed at him. His great-grandfather had been involved in something far darker than Daniel had ever understood, and now that the cult had been vanquished, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he, too, was bound by something deeper than just his bloodline. He opened the door to the shack and entered. Inside, the dusty air smelled of old wood and soil. The tools of his trade were neatly arranged along the walls, each item in its place: shovels, spades, and trowels, all covered with the grime of years of use. The journal was on the desk, open to a page he had never noticed before. There, scrawled in his great-grandfather's shaky handwriting, were new words, cryptic symbols that seemed almost alive as they stared back at him. "You have done what needed to be done, but the bloodline is cursed. You cannot escape what lies in your bones. The pact has been made. The price will be paid." The words burned into his mind, and he felt a coldness settle into his chest. The sacrifice he had made, the ritual that had severed the cult's power, had not freed him from the chains of his family's past. He had broken one curse, but it seemed that there was another, far more insidious, one waiting to claim him. The door to the shack slammed shut behind him with a sudden, jarring force. Daniel whipped around, his breath caught in his throat. The room had grown inexplicably cold, the shadows in the corners darker than they should have been. A voice, a low, guttural whisper, drifted to his ears, carrying with it an unmistakable message. "You thought you could destroy us, Daniel," the voice murmured, "but you have become one of us." A shape began to form in the shadows, a figure standing tall and unyielding, draped in tattered robes. The face was obscured, but Daniel could feel the weight of the presence before him, an ancient and terrible force that had once been bound by the same ritual he had performed. The air grew dense with an almost tangible malice as the figure spoke again. "The cult is not dead, Daniel. It lives in you, in your blood, in the price you paid to close the gate. The pact was never yours to break. You belong to us now." Daniel's legs gave way beneath him, and he crumpled to the floor, his heart racing. The shadows in the shack seemed to close in, wrapping around him like chains, tightening with every breath he took. His great-grandfather's warning echoed in his mind. The price will be paid. The figure stepped forward, and for the first time Daniel saw its face, a familiar, twisted version of his own. His breath caught in his throat as he realized the horrifying truth. He was the final piece of the puzzle. His bloodline had always been the key, and now his family was bound forever to the darkness of Hollow Creek. With one final agonizing scream, Daniel was pulled into the shadows. Days passed, and the town of Hollow Creek seemed to return to its quiet, idyllic state. The murders had stopped, and the whispers of the cult faded from memory. The cemetery remained peaceful, and the once dreaded graveyard had become little more than a curiosity for passers-by. But the town had changed in subtle ways, ways that no one could truly explain. The air still felt heavy, as if the land itself bore the weight of something unspoken. And in the deepest part of the graveyard, an old gravedigger's shack stood, its door ajar. No one ever entered, but those who dared to venture near it at night claimed to hear the distant sound of shovels scraping the earth and whispers carried on the wind. The town of Hollow Creek had been freed from one curse, but it had never escaped the darkness beneath its soil. The pact had been made, and in the shadows it waited, patiently, for the time when it would claim its next victim. We made it to the end, But the terror doesn't stop here. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. If you enjoyed the story, share it with a friend, and let's see who else can survive our next nightmare.